Right now, there's a Christopher Nolan movie sitting 3 days from release. Critics who have actually watched it are calling it one of the best films of his entire career. Variety called it an astonishing achievement. Multiple outlets are already using the words Best Picture frontrunner. And the trailer for that same movie has over 700,000 dislikes. That is not a typo. 700,000 against about 70,000 likes. A 9-to-1 ratio on a Christopher Nolan movie, which up until this year had literally never happened before. Not for Inception, not for Interstellar, not for Oppenheimer. Nolan trailers get likes. That is one of the most reliable patterns in modern Hollywood. Until now. So here's the actual mystery I want to dig into today. Not, is this movie good or bad? Because the people who have seen it already answer that question, and the answer is overwhelmingly positive. The real question is this: how does a film get simultaneously hailed as a masterpiece by the press and buried by the public before a single ticket goes on sale? That gap is the story. And once you follow it all the way through, from a Yale-educated actress roasting Homer to Elon Musk insulting the wrong guy named Tom Holland, you start to see this isn't really about Greek mythology at all. Quick context for anyone who's been living under a rock or, honestly, living a normal life that doesn't involve checking film Twitter every 4 hours. The Odyssey is Christopher Nolan's follow-up to Oppenheimer. It's his adaptation of the Homer epic, the 10-year journey of Odysseus trying to get home after the Trojan War, fighting monsters, gods, and his own crew's terrible decision-making the entire way. Nolan shot the whole thing on IMAX film, first director to ever do a full feature that way, with a budget north of $250 million. Matt Damon plays Odysseus, and Hathaway plays his wife Penelope. Tom Holland plays their son Telemachus. Then you've got Zendaya as Athena, Charlize Theron as Circe, Robert Pattinson, John Bernthal, and Lupita Nyong'o in the dual role of Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra. On paper, this is exactly the kind of project Nolan built his entire reputation on. Massive scale, practical effects over green screen. A filmmaker who has spent 2 decades being the one guy in the industry who doesn't seem to bend to trends. So when the discourse around this movie turned into a war, a lot of people were confused, because Nolan is usually the safest bet in the business. He was not safe this time. Let's talk about why. The backlash didn't start with the trailer. It started back in January, when Elon Musk posted that Nolan had, quote, lost his integrity after rumors spread online that Lupita Nyong'o had been cast as Helen of Troy. That one post set the tone for the next 6 months. Then the actual trailers started dropping, and the dislike count became its own news story. When the countdown trailer landed on Universal's channel, it hit an estimated 55,000 dislikes within days. By the following week, that number had multiplied by 10, 600,000. Universal actually locked the reply function on their social posts once the number crossed 500,000. Which is about as clear a signal as a studio can send that they know they have a problem. By the time the London premiere happened on July 6th, the trailer was already being tracked as the second most disliked Hollywood trailer of all time, only behind Snow White from last year. And here's the detail that makes this whole thing genuinely strange. The premiere happened, the reviews started coming in glowing, and the dislike count didn't slow down. It sped up. 66,000 more dislikes landed in one single day, the day after critics called it a triumph. Whatever this backlash is actually about, it clearly was never about whether the movie is good. Or what actually lit the fuse. A few things stacked on top of each other. First, the casting. Nyongo as Helen of Troy drew immediate pushback from people who pointed to Homer's original description of Helen as fair-skinned. Elliot Page was cast as a character named Sinon, who technically isn't even in Homer's Odyssey. He's from Virgil's Aeneid, which gave critics of the casting an easy target since it looked like an addition rather than an adaptation choice. And then there's Travis Scott, making his acting debut as a Homeric bard. Nolan has defended that casting as a nod to the oral poetry tradition evolving into rap, but a lot of viewers read it as a celebrity name slapped onto the poster to chase a younger audience. Second, and this one actually shows up in the trailer itself, the dialogue. Nolan chose to have his cast speak in modern, distinctly American vernacular rather than the more formal, period-flavored English audiences associate with sword and sandal epics. For some viewers, it's a bold, intentional choice, the same way he modernized dialogue in Dunkirk and Oppenheimer. For others, hearing Greek warriors talk like they're in a present-day action movie broke the illusion completely. And third, the source text itself. Nolan built his adaptation around Emily Wilson's translation of The Odyssey, the first English translation of the poem done by a woman, known for being blunt and stripped of a lot of the romantic flourishes older translations added. That's a genuinely interesting artistic choice. But once people online framed it as the feminist translation, it became another data point in a narrative that had already been forming, that this Odyssey was less interested in Homer and more interested in making a statement. None of these individually would have been enough to generate 700,000 dislikes. Stacked together, they built a story before anyone outside a press screening had seen a single scene. Then Lupita Nyong'o gave the backlash new fuel, and honestly, this part is where things got genuinely messy. Back in May, in an interview with Elle, Nyongo admitted she had no idea what the Odyssey even was when Nolan first approached her about the role, despite having a master's degree from the Yale School of Drama. She said she did a crash course in Greek mythology once she got the part, which, fine, that's honest, that's not a crime. But then, a few weeks later, doing press for the film, she was asked what she'd say to Homer if she could sit him down and watch the movie together. And her answer was basically that she'd ask him how he felt about how little time he gave to the women in his own story, given how little space they got. In a separate interview, she went further and called Homer's treatment of women sexist during a press junket. Now, here's the problem people had with that. This is a 3,000-year-old epic poem that has survived, been translated, studied, and debated for literal millennia, being critiqued for its politics by someone who, by her own admission months earlier, hadn't read it before landing the role. The internet did not let that slide gently. It got compared almost instantly to Rachel Zegler's Snow White press tour from last year, where Zegler made comments about the original film that a lot of people saw as dismissive of the source material she was being paid to represent. Different actress, different movie, same exact pattern. And audiences have apparently developed a very short fuse for it. And then, because 2026 requires at least one completely unhinged subplot in every entertainment story, Elon Musk entered the chat again. And this time it got genuinely funny. Musk had already been one of the loudest voices attacking the casting back in January. But in July, responding to someone praising the film online, Musk fired off a crude insult aimed at, quote, Tom Holland. Except the Tom Holland he was replying to wasn't the actor. It was a completely unrelated British historian, also named Tom Holland, who writes about ancient history and had simply posted a positive reaction to the film after seeing it at the premiere. Musk appears to have never clocked the difference. The historian Tom Holland responded with basically 2 words, told Musk it was his loss, and got showered with support online. While Musk got mocked for insulting a random historian while apparently believing he was owning a Marvel star, that it's a small moment. But it tells you a lot about how this entire discourse cycle works. A huge chunk of the loudest reactions to this film are not actually about the film. They're about a name, a headline, a screenshot, moving through the internet faster than anyone can check basic facts. Now let's talk about the part of this story that barely made it into most headlines because outrage travels faster than praise. We're the people who have actually sat in a theater and watched all 2+ hours of this thing saying. Overwhelmingly positive. Not mixed. Not good but flawed. Overwhelmingly positive. Variety called it a triumphant, spectacular epic and singled out the cast for delivering some of the best performances of their careers. Multiple critics described the battle sequences, especially the fall of Troy, as some of the most ambitious set pieces Nolan has ever attempted, several times the scale of anything in his back catalog. One outlet flagged Samantha Morton's sequence in particular as a standout that people will be talking about for years. Collider's reviewers straight up told people to see it in 70mm IMAX if they have the option, calling it a jaw-dropping experience. This is genuinely rare. Critics disagree on almost everything. A near-unanimous wave of praise across outlets with very different tastes is not something that happens by accident, and it's not something a marketing team can fake with cherry-picked quotes. Something in that finished film is landing exactly the way Nolan wanted it to, which makes the trailer situation even stranger. The people with actual access to the movie are raving. The people reacting only to a 2-minute trailer and a handful of press junket clips are furious. Those are 2 completely different audiences having 2 completely different conversations, and right now, almost nobody online is acknowledging both at once. Nolan himself finally addressed the backlash directly in an interview, and his response was pretty low-key. He basically said this comes with the territory and pointed back to his own history specifically the backlash he got decades ago for casting Heath Ledger, at the time mostly known as a heartthrob, as the Joker. Everyone thought that casting was a disaster before the movie came out. It became one of the most acclaimed performances in comic book movie history. Robert Pattinson, who's also in this film, made a similar comparison, pointing to his own experience getting torn apart online before Twilight became a generational phenomenon. The pattern both of them are describing is real. Pre-release internet anger and actual audience reception have diverged before, repeatedly, in ways nobody could have predicted from the outside. But here's the thing that makes those comparisons imperfect. The Joker backlash and the Twilight backlash were about casting choices specifically. What's happening with The Odyssey right now is casting, dialogue, translation choices, and multiple rounds of press tour controversy all stacked on top of each other, feeding a much bigger, more exhausting culture war conversation that has nothing to do with the quality of the film itself. Here's my actual read on all of this, after going through every layer of it. This isn't really a story about whether Christopher Nolan made a good movie. Based on everything critics with actual access are saying, he probably did, maybe one of the best of his career. This is a story about how completely disconnected pre-release online sentiment has become from the actual product. A trailer can rack up 750,000 dislikes and mean almost nothing about opening weekend, because dislikes cost nothing and require no commitment. Meanwhile, walking into an IMAX theater and paying for a ticket is an entirely different level of buy-in. The real test isn't the dislike counter. It's July 17th, when this thing actually opens, and we find out whether all that online noise translates into empty seats, or whether, like Heath Ledger's Joker, it turns out the loudest reaction online was never representative of the actual audience at all. Snow White's trailer backlash last year turned out to genuinely predict a box office disaster. The Odyssey might be the exact opposite case. A movie the internet decided to hate before it even had the chance to be seen. Either way, we're about to get one of the clearest tests in years of whether trailer dislikes actually mean anything at all. I'll be back the moment opening weekend numbers land to break down whether this backlash actually meant anything or whether Nolan just pulled off another Heath Ledger situation in real time. If you want that breakdown the second the numbers drop, subscribe now so you don't miss it. And let me know in the comments, are you seeing this one opening weekend or are you waiting to see how it lands first?